you have in your Bible, you're with you, if you want to turn to Judges chapter 6. We're going to be looking at Judges chapter 6 and 7 this evening, just some highlights or excerpts from Judges 6 and 7. We're going to begin in Judges 6 in verse 13. And Gideon said to him, this is Gideon, the judge, speaking to God, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian." And what we see here in Gideon is something kind of similar to what we talked about this morning. And that is, what has happened here is Israel has found itself in a difficult place, and things are not going well. The Midianites are has an advantage over them, or are beating them, and they're frustrated, and they immediately assume that God's forsaken them. Interestingly enough, God hadn't forsaken them. God was actually using Midian to discipline Israel for their disobedience to him. He had told them not to fear the gods of the Midianites. They had begun to fear the gods of the Midianites, and he was trying to get them to stop and come back to the point where they feared him and him alone and followed him and him alone. So he was actually there, and he was actually working with them, and he was actually doing something for them, but that is not the way he took it. And the question was, where are all these wonderful deeds that our fathers talked about? Our fathers talked about all these things that God did for them in Egypt, when he brought us out of Egypt, and where is God at this time? And what Judges 6 and 7 is recording here is a period of dissonance, a period of discord between Israel and God, and then the resolution between God and Israel. We want to observe some of the circumstances from Israel's victory that brought about their deliverance from Midian. And the point of that is to equip ourselves to be victorious in our own spiritual battles. First off, I want you to realize, if you look at the beginning of Judges chapter 6, verses 1 through 6, we see the problem that had happened. They had turned away from God. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian 7 years. And the hand of Midian overpowered Israel, and because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves the dens that are in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. Listen, this was so rough, they had gone up into the mountains and dug holes into the ground to hide themselves from the Midianites. Whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. They would encamp against them and devour the produce of the land as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, and no sheep or ox or donkey, for they would come up with their livestock and their tents. They would come like locusts in number. Both they and their camels could not be counted, so that they laid waste the land as they came in. And Israel was brought very low because of Midian. And the people of Israel cried out for help to the Lord. And down in verse 10 it says, "I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, but you have not obeyed my voice." And so verse 10 tells us the crux of the problem. It's God explaining to them why this discipline is taking place, why they're being allowed to be overcome by Midian. They did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Well, what was that? Well, they didn't obey his voice, and they began to respect the Amorite gods. So they had turned away from God, and in turning away from God, they lost the blessings of God. They found salvation when they turned back to follow God. Chapter 6, verses 14, 15, and 16, the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you?" He's here talking to Gideon. And Gideon has been asking what's going on and why God is allowing these things to happen. And God said, look, I am doing something and I am delivering the people. Didn't I send you? You go in this might of yours and save Israel. Did I not send you? And he said to him, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest of Manasseh, and I'm the least in my father's house. And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you. And you, the second you, is a plural you that accounts for all of Israel, not Gideon alone. And you shall strike the Midianites as one man. Now, the first thing I want you to think about in talking about how it is that we overcome the circumstances we're in, I think sometimes we feel exactly like Gideon, right? We feel like we're weak, we feel like we're unimportant, we feel like we come from an insignificant place, and we're an insignificant member of the place that we come from, and that we're not equipped to do these things. And God explains, look, the way you're going to be successful is because I'm going to be with you, and you guys are going to work under my direction. So the first thing we need to do is turn to the Lord. When people in the Lord's church throughout this country bemoan and cry the state of Christianity, and the fact that there seems to be more people turning away from God than are turning to God in the world in general, and that we aren't successful at the work that we've been given to do, we're basically acting exactly like Gideon and exactly like the Israelites. And the first thing that we need to realize is the way to solve the problem to begin with is for us to turn to God, for us to go back to God, for us to seek God's guidance and direction, and for us to work under His authority, doing things that He has instructed us to do exactly the way that He's instructed us to do them, and not decide for Him what should be done or should not be done, or how it should be done or not be done, or when it should be done and not be done, and all those other things that men do. We start looking at these situations and saying, well, this isn't working. Maybe we should try this. And that has brought even congregations of brethren so-called. I'm going to use that language as it's pulled out of, 2 Corinthians, I guess it is, brethren so-called. Even from among brethren so-called, where you walk into a worship assembly and you really can't tell the difference between what's going on there and what's going on a Friday or Saturday night at a party or a music presentation. There are bands, and there's lights, and there's smoke, and there's dancing, and all sorts of things that are happening in the name of worship in an attempt to attract people. That's not the way to do it. How shall we do this? That's the question of Gideon. I will be with you is God's answer. You come to me and let me go with you, and you stand together, and you'll win if you do it my way. Now that last verse, verse 16, lends us nicely into the next point. Not only do we need to turn to the Lord, but we need to stand united as one. Again, look at verse 16. The Lord said to him, I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man. The entire group, he says, you're going to strike them as one man. You're going to work together, in other words, to do this task. We also have to stand as one man. Do you remember Jesus, John chapter 17, that prayer that he offered shortly before he was to go to the cross? I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one. Just as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they may be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. That they may all be one. That was Jesus' prayer for believers, that we would stand as one man. Romans 16:17, I appeal to you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions. Those that create obstacles contrary to the doctrine that you have taught, avoid them. Not only are we to stand as one man, but he warns us to keep our eyes open and notice the people that are altering the doctrine and that are creating division among the people of God, and to avoid such people, because we can't stand as one man if there are those that are sowing discord and that are creating divisions and problems. And so he said, avoid that. Finally, he wrote to the church at Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 10, I appeal to you, brothers, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all agree that there be no divisions among you, but that you be united in the same mind and in the same judgment. To put it simply, the way Jesus did, a house divided against itself cannot stand. We can't be successful unless we go into the battle with God on our side and stand as one man doing the work that God has given us to do. That's the only way. Thirdly, we're going to ask the question, by many or by few? This is a principle, or at least that language is, by many or by few, pulled from 1 Samuel 14 and verse 6. You might remember the story. It says, Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, come, let us go over to the garrison of the uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few. That's where I get that language from. Jonathan's point, of course, being is that God isn't limited in his success based upon how powerful we are. We don't have to have an army of 10,000 to be successful. He can be successful with few, is what Jonathan is saying. God, if he is with us, will give us success, and we have no reason to fear. We see this in our story as well. The Midianites and their allies outnumbered Israel greatly from the very outset. In chapter 7 and verse 12 of Judges, the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east lay along the valley like locusts in abundance. Now, I don't know how many that is, and one of the reasons I don't know how many that is because the nature of the image is trying to show that there were so many of them, they couldn't be counted. Just like the swarms of locusts that come in, and they're just these big black clouds that are moving along and eating up the land, and you have no idea whether there's 10,000 or 10 million of them. He says that this army was like the locusts in abundance, and their camels were without number, and the sand that's on the seashore in abundance. There were so many of these people, there's no way to even count how many their adversaries were. And so, certainly what the Lord did was told Gideon, now you need to go up and you need to find as many people as you can to come and fight. And don't worry about them if they're getting old. You go ahead and bring them into service because we need more people. And don't worry about it if they're a little young. You go ahead and press them into service because we need more people. And I know ordinarily, Gideon, God has instructed the armies to be men from the age of 25 to whatever the top age was. I can't recall exactly what it was right now. I understand that ordinarily that's the restriction, but we need people because this army is so great that's against us. So let's let the young ladies come and fight too. And rather than just stick to the Israelites, find some friends, some allies that you can make some deals with and bring their armies into the... Is that how God deals with this situation? This situation where the Midianites were so many in number with the Amalekites and the other Amorites that they couldn't even be counted. Listen to what it says, Judges chapter 7, verses 2 to 7. The Lord said to Gideon, the people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand. Now, Gideon's army was numbered. There was a certain number of them, and it was not a huge number, quite honestly. But God said, there's too many. Lest Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand has saved me. He doesn't want to leave the impression with them when this is over with that their army won this battle because of the merits and the power of their army. Now therefore proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home and hurry away from Mount Gilead. 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Now, we've got an army that's like the locusts in abundance, and we've got another army going against them that's now pared down to 10,000 people. Too many. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And anyone of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, shall go with you. And anyone whom I say, this one shall not go with you, shall not go. So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you set him by himself. Likewise, everyone who kneels down to drink. The number of those who lapped and putting their hands to their mouth was 300 men, but the rest of the people knelt down to drink water. And the Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 who lapped, I will save you. Give the Midianites into your hand, let all the others go, every man to his own home. You send all of the army home except 300 people. And I'll take that group of 300 people, and we'll go against that great army that can't be numbered. And you'll win. God is not handicapped by low provisions. Just this morning we read from John 6. You remember the boy? The young lad? There were 5,000 men who were hungry. In the middle of nowhere, there's no food for them. A young lad comes along and has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus says, that's enough. Set them down, I'll start feeding them. God isn't limited by low provisions. God isn't afraid to go into a battle because his warrior is weaker and smaller and younger and less trained. God was perfectly happy with David going against Goliath. God was perfectly happy with Joshua leading Israel into the promised land to take the land. God was perfectly happy with Gideon with 300 men. So that they understood that it was by the power of God. It was because God was with them. So turn to God, stand as one, and don't worry about what it looks like, for we walk by faith and not by sight. Don't look at the adversary. Don't look at how big you think they are, whereas but grasshoppers in their sight. Don't look at all of the things that will prevent you from being successful. That's what the children of Israel did when they first got to the promised land. They sent the spies over. The spies come back and said, man, everything's big over there. The armies are big over there. There's no way we can win. God had already told them they'd won. Don't look at the reasons why you cannot succeed. Understand that if you are with God and you are doing what God told you to do, you can't do anything but succeed. And move forward with that faith. Foolishness of God is wiser than our very best of plans. That's kind of a foolish plan, isn't it? When you're going against such a great army to pare it down to only 300 people, it got worse. Before we read any further in Judges, I want to go over to 1 Corinthians chapter 1 for a minute and talk about this principle about the foolishness of God being wiser than the very best things that we can come up with. 1 Corinthians 1:18, for the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing. And so this message of the gospel about Jesus Christ coming into the world and living without sin and going to the cross and dying and being buried and being raised on the third day, it's just a foolish message to people. The word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. For it's written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where's the one who is wise? Where's the scribe? Where's the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews and folly to the Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. Look at verse 25 closely. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger. And that's a principle we need to come to understand and realize. That we don't judge truth based upon human reasoning. That we don't judge the value of a doctrine based upon human reasoning. That's essentially what we talked about a little bit in the Bible class this morning, right? These people that want to make manna some naturally occurring thing. But because human reasoning says that it's foolish to believe in a miracle. Because those things just don't happen. That's fantasy. That's magic. That's the things of the movies. The Red Sea doesn't really divide. They find explanations around all of these things because it seems fanciful and foolish to believe in God working supernaturally on the earth to accomplish things. But the foolishness of God is wiser than men. The wisdom of this world doesn't lead to God, and it doesn't lead to salvation. That's the warning that's there. Now, let's go back to Judges chapter 7 and listen to what God had these 300 people do. He divided the 300 men into 3 companies. Look, if it wasn't bad enough that it was only 300 against an army that couldn't be numbered, he then divides those 300 up into 3 groups of 100. And he put trumpets into the hands of all of them, and empty jars with torches inside the jars. And he said to them, look at me and do likewise. When I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do. So Gideon equips his 300 men with a trumpet, a clay jar, and a torch burning inside of that clay jar. How many of you want to go into battle if that's the only implement you're given to fight? Yeah, neither do I. Because the guys on the other side, they had swords, and they had spears, and they had chariots, and they had camels, and they had arrows, and they had all the other implements of warfare that were going to cause them to be. And Gideon's army had trumpets. Verse 20 says the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the jars. They held in their left hands the torches and their right hands the trumpets to blow, and they cried out, a sword for the Lord and a sword for Gideon. You know what happened? Those 300 men won the battle. God's way works. Even if I analyze it and think, how foolish is that? I don't think there's a general anywhere in history that would have approached this battle in that way, by making the army smaller and by implementing that army with the tools that he gave them. And yet it worked. So Isaiah says in Isaiah 55 and verse 8, of God, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Even if men think it's foolish. Even if people think that the gospel is foolish, we preach the gospel. Even if people think that the doctrines of the New Testament are foolish and outdated, we preach and we practice and we believe and we walk with God and we stand united as one, and we cannot lose if God is fighting the battle with us. Next, it tells us that everyone stood in their place. Judges 7:21, every man stood in his place around the camp, and all the army ran. Their enemies ran away. Everyone fulfilling their role, everyone standing their ground, everyone standing in his place around the camp. That's the next principle. We find our place, we get in our place, and we do our work, whoever and whatever we are. Bible class teachers. Bible class teachers are extremely valuable and important. I think it is sad when we have to wrestle and look and scrounge to find people who are willing to instruct and teach the young. Bible class teachers are great and they're important and they're wonderful. Children are important. Children shouldn't be overlooked, and they certainly shouldn't be viewed as a nuisance. We should be joyed to hear children in the assemblies. Deacons, elders, evangelists, men, women. Doesn't matter who we talk about or what we talk about, whether we talk about genders or we talk about roles or we talk about people or we talk about individuals or we talk about classes or groups. It doesn't matter. And by the way, in case you didn't notice, I made that list alphabetical. Because the fact is in the body of Christ, there is no rank order. There is no one part that is more important or more valuable or has a greater role or a role of greater importance than the other. There is no hierarchy among the parts. And so the children can come at the top of the list if we want to consider it that way. Because listen, that's the future of the Lord's church. Children learning and being taught and raised up in the way of God. Suffer not the children to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of God. It's just people. We're people, each doing our unique task in our unique place at a unique time. Every man stood in his place around the camp. That should be a descriptive of the members of this local church. Every man. And by the way, please understand, man is used generically there. That's just a short way of saying mankind. Every person, for the benefit of modern sensibilities, every person stood in their place. That should be what describes this local body and how we go about doing our work. We have to make the application of these things to the spiritual battle that we are in, because I'm going to tell you something. The spiritual battle that we are fighting against the forces of evil and wickedness is a much greater and more important battle than the battle that Gideon fought with the Midianites. That deliverance was simply a tool being used by God to shine light on a much greater battle and a much bigger foe and a much greater army than any of those things. And our fight is not against flesh and blood, and our fight is not on this earth. Jesus told Pilate, if my kingdom were of this realm, then my servants would be fighting. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. It's not about the here and now. It's about fighting against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places and overcoming ungodliness and unrighteousness and men and women being saved. It's about souls being won. We have to make the application of these things to our spiritual battle. We have to take our place in this body and serve God faithfully. And it begins with us turning to God, us seeking deliverance from God, us seeking guidance from God, us opening up His Word and seeing what He is commanding us to do. It continues by us standing united as a body. Not thinking about ourselves as individuals or looking to serve ourselves as individuals, but working together as a unit to carry out the commands of God, whether it be by many or by few. Maybe tonight it's by few. Maybe next year it's by many. Doesn't matter. For walking with God, God will use whoever's here. We don't have to be afraid of the work. We don't have to believe that we're not going to be successful because we don't have as many people as we think we would like to have, or the right people that we think we ought to have. If we just had one person who could do this job, or one person who was better at that, or two people to do this role over here, if we just had, it doesn't matter. God doesn't need all the pieces in place. God needs pieces to be in their place. We have to trust God, understand that His foolishness is greater than my wisdom. And then we have to take our places. Fight the battle. Do the work. And when it's all said and done, we get to simply let God be glorified. This last image, it's on the screen behind me, is an interesting artist depiction of something that happens in this story a little earlier. Gideon actually tests God 3 times in these 2 chapters. And this scene is an interesting scene because Gideon has built an altar and an angel is sent to provide fire for that altar. As I think about that, I simply think about the fact that what Gideon is learning and what we're learning through Gideon in this is that God is watching. God knows what we need. God knows how to help us. And God will give us success if we trust and realize that we don't have to rely upon our own strength, because we work with the strength that He supplies. That's what Gideon was learning. Remember, we read that Gideon at the beginning was saying, but I'm from this little tribe of Manasseh, and my family is small in Manasseh, and I'm the least member of my family, and who am I? And God was trying to get him to understand, I don't need somebody great. I need somebody who will do what I send them to do. I can take care of the rest of it. God will take care of these things for us as well. We need to put our faith in God. We need to walk by faith and not by sight.